Good afternoon, everyone. This is Stephen Hernandez for lesson 4, the last lesson in this series for My Mental Wellness. Thank you all for those of you who have been part of this journey over the past 4 weeks. I hope that it's been helpful and informative for you. For those of you who are just joining, my name is Stephen Hernandez, and today we're going to be talking about personality types and a little bit about, due to popular request, birth order as well. A little bit about myself. In addition to my work in the nonprofit and corporate philanthropy field, I'm a marriage and relationship educator. I have a YouTube channel where I share information on nonprofit work and relationships, which is called Stephen Hernandez's Nonprofit Fundamentals. And I also have a podcast with a very similar name, which is Stephen Hernandez's Relationship and Nonprofit Fundamentals. So you can definitely check me out there as well. Our objective today is to provide a general overview of the various personality types and how to best communicate with them. So again, our overall theme has always been about communication, and we want to make sure that we're maximizing our techniques and understanding that not everyone is the same. And I always find that fascinating because people tend to communicate in the same way. And assume that because the way that we feel, the way that we experience the world, that's how other people do it as well. And that, frankly, is just not the case. So again, some of you have seen this slide a number of times before, but it's important to recap the things that are important. So where do our communication styles come from? They come from our culture. They come from the art we consume, the information we consume, the history of our people, the history of our family, the history of ourselves. All of those things influence the way that we communicate, how we absorb information, how we interpret information, and how we interact with the world. Now, to build on that a little bit further, where do our personality types come from? Because there's different types of personality. And again, this is going to be a very broad overview, and we can definitely share some more resources and get into more of the personality types as well. So, and as always, inshallah, if you have questions, please leave them in the comment thread. I would be happy to address those at the end of the session. So where do our personality types come from? Our personality is made up of so many things. Our sense of humor, are we extroverted or introverted? How much extroversion and introversion do we have? What things do we like? What things do we don't like? Are we a nervous person? Are we confident? Are we self-confident? Are we arrogant? Are we moral? Are we amoral? All those things in this image, and this is just a few of them, they make up our personality type. So let's go a little bit further. Now, I really want to emphasize that there are so many ways you can take a test, if you will, or a quiz, or have a personality disorder. I found all kinds of different images, and this is something I've seen numerous times in the marriage education and communications work that I do, both for like business, in the workplace, in the family, and in personal relationships. Perhaps one of the most famous ones is the Myers-Briggs personality type, which is the image that I'm showing here. Probably in some form or fashion, maybe you took this in high school, maybe you took it in a college psych class. A lot of people are familiar with this particular personality disorder. It's been around for a long time. It's very famous. I really want to be very clear. Your personality type that you took when you were like 17 and a half does not have to define you as a person. Things change, people change. I do encourage people to take as many personality tests as they like. I don't think, again, that they're ironclad, but it does give a good kind of sounding board, because there are some things that really do, like, will show up, and the things you'll learn about yourself and the people that are in your life. So to level set, let's look at the various personality types from this particular rubric, which is the Myers-Briggs. So on your upper left, you'll have the extroverts. Extroverts are people who are energized by people. They enjoy a variety of tasks, a quick pace. They're always moving. They got stuff going on. They want to be in the mix of it, and they are good at multitasking. Now, on the opposite side of that, you have introverts who often like to work alone, or in small groups, and they prefer a more deliberate, slower pace. On this side, on the right-hand quadrant, you have people who are sensors. Now, these are realistic people who like to focus on the facts and the details and apply common sense and past experiences or experience to come up with practical solutions to problems. If you will, the opposite of that are the intuitives. Intuitives are people who prefer to focus on possibilities in the big picture, and they easily see patterns in things or in events. They value innovation, and they see creative solutions to problems. On the lower left-hand quadrant, we have the thinkers. Thinkers, or Ts, tend to make decisions using logical analysis. They objectively weigh the pros and cons, and they value personality traits and others, such as honesty, consistency, and fairness. People who are feelers, they tend to be sensitive and cooperative and decide based on their own personal values and how others will be affected by their actions before they take an action or make a decision. On the lower right-hand quadrant, you have the judgers. Judgers, or Js, tend to be organized and prepared. They like to make and stick to plans, emphasis on stick, and they are comfortable following most rules. Conversely, you have perceivers, who prefer to keep their options open, like to be able to act spontaneously, and are more likely to be flexible with making plans. I found this on the right-hand side to be interesting, which is the personality distribution, the personality type distributed by the general population. So ISFJs, so someone who is an introvert, sensor, feeler, judger, that is the leading, most popular type, like that's the most common type. And the INFJ, which is the introvert, intuitive, feeler, judger, is the rarest type based on the sample size. I just found that interesting. So a little bit more about this Myers-Briggs analysis. And there's so many Myers-Briggs that you can take. You can go online. You can purchase one. You can do one that's like 5 minutes, or like takes like an hour to do. I think there's a bunch of different types. I always find it to be an interesting exercise. So let's get into a little bit more of what these terms mean. When we talk about introverts or introversion, that's a preference for privacy. And again, you can see how in our in the introversion, extroversion, preference for groups or companionship, even our personal, our family history, our culture, our religion will influence these things as well. Our intuition is our preference for trusting our hunches, visionary ability, perhaps our dreams, or like just a feeling that we have, versus sensing. A person who emphasizes their senses, they prefer concrete data when they make decisions. They want to know what the facts are before they decide something. So the classic example of this would be someone who's a sensor. Before they buy a car, they read all the manuals, they check all the reviews, they test drive it, versus someone who's perhaps more on the intuition side. They're thinking like, well, I would look really cool in this car, or I have a good feeling while I'm in this car. And that would be their determining factor. And again, I really want to emphasize that there is no right or wrong to how we are. That's just how we are as people, and we're different. Thinkers, they have a preference for hard facts over feelings. And a feeler relies on feelings in their decision making. You can imagine how these two extremes would often have problems communicating with one another. Someone who's a perceptor, or emphasis on the perceiving end of things, they have a preference for open-endedness, a casual approach to life, kind of come as come can, or like they're very casual about things. Where a judger would have a preference for closure, focus, and clear objectives. Like they're much more regimented. So again, our question from previously: how can we break bad communication habits for all these different things, especially if we are perhaps more on the judging side, or we're more on the extroversion side? We have to be aware of what? Our body language, our tone, the eye contact that we make, the words that we use. We need to be aware of how we're communicating and who our audience is. Because people react to senses, their senses react to stimulus differently. the way that they interact with the world can really influence how your communication goes. So let's continue a little bit more about these personality types, right? Remember, when you're introverted, because introverts, they get their energy from being alone or in small groups, like maybe a trusted group. An introvert doesn't necessarily mean that you're shy, but they need their space. They need to be able to kind of focus their energy, right? So from a workplace standpoint, an introverted employee may be kind of quiet, but they can still be very outspoken and confident when need arise. In terms of the energy column, the extroverts, they get their energy from other people. Introverts often find extroverts exhausting because they like to work on multiple things at a quick pace. They're always kind of like all over the place, and that can really wear people out, especially if their energy is more on the extra introversion side. On the information quadrant, people who are intuitives, they focus on the possibilities of these things. They see the big picture and how everything can connect. The opposite end of that, if you will, is the sensing people. They're realists. They use their five senses to assess how things are and pay attention to concrete facts and details. Again, this slide shows you, if you will, like the extremes, not the extremes, but the different sides to the same coin, and how if you are interacting with someone who's very different from you in terms of how you absorb information, how you process things, how you organize your life, that can be a challenge from a communication standpoint. Oftentimes, you'll find that you'll meet people who are very different than you, and that will attract you to them as a friend, as a potential partner. But often that difference, after a while, will start to drive you crazy. So, for example, if you are on the organization side, if you're a J and you like rules, deadlines, and structure, maybe you really like at first being around like this spontaneous, like, like let's do whatever, let's skip work today, let's skip school, let's go have fun. That might be great for a little while, but you have your rules, your deadlines, and your structure. That is a core element of your personality. It's going to be very difficult for you to be around someone who insists on being spontaneous at all times, who doesn't like plans, who won't call ahead. Those kinds of things at first may be exciting and interesting, but they can drive you bonkers pretty quickly. So, which is why the title of this slide is Seek Balance. So let me say that again because it's so important. We must seek balance. Again, Islam always says for us to be kind of balanced people. Like we shouldn't be extremes in other way, in any kind of way, right? So you must seek balance. So if you're a high extrovert, right, they can be excitements. They can seek excitement. That can be through extreme sports, maybe risky behavior or dangerous behavior, attention seeking in ways that maybe are not healthy. If you're on the low end of that, if you get out of balance, you can easily socially withdraw, right? I think a lot of extroverts and introverts, they really struggled during the lockdowns of COVID because the extrovert person who likes to go out, who gets that energy from people, really was starved of that energy. But also, if you're kind of a low on the extroversion and you already have a tendency to socially withdraw, you may really have struggled with this sense of loneliness during this time. If you're high on the openness end, but sometimes too high, you get into magical thinking in terms of you just assume that things are going to work out. And you're kind of quirky, right? You don't plan things. You don't like to plan things. If you're on the low end, if you get too much into this, you can become inflexible or closed-minded, and it will drive you bonkers when people won't follow the plan, and on and on and on. All these different things, right? A high consciousness level can get into perfectionism and workaholism because you're so concerned about really staying on task in a certain way. If you're low on conscientiousness, that can lead you to be easily distracted, or irresponsible with things. You'll make promises with no intention of keeping them, maybe not on purpose, but you get into the habit of not following through on things. Again, seek balance. No one is perfect, right? So this particular screenshot is, I looked up the bad traits or the extreme end of an ESTJ, right? So we go back to our slide. An ESTJ would be someone who's extrovert, who senses, who's a thinker, and a judger. Okay, so ESTJ. So it's these four right here. They like rules and deadlines. They're realists. They get their energy from other people, and they're logical and analytical. But what is the extreme end, or like, how does that personality type how can that go into the extremes? So this is what I looked up for us. An ESTJ can be extremely judgmental. They can become stubborn and inflexible, unreasonable, even, or overly rigid. They may have trouble expressing their own feelings. Feelings is not something to be valued, according to them. They can be insensitive and inadvertently hurt others because they may be very blunt with their communication. Again, right? Our overall theme in these 4 weeks has been about focusing on our communication skills. And an ESTJ may really struggle with, being aware of social niceties, social courtesies. They may just be so blunt with their information that it will offend people. An ESTJ can be uncomfortable with change, and they usually have zero patience and no tolerance for those who do not share their values and beliefs. So an ESTJ is an example of someone, and we all know people who are like this, things are black and white. This is right, this is wrong. This is good, this is bad, and there's no room for nuance. And that's just how they see the world. Because again, to an extreme, an ESTJ, and this is just one example. Every one of the personality types has positives and negatives, right? I chose this example because I think it's an easy one for us to wrap our minds around. Ultimately, as we said from the top, they can be very judgmental and they can be very demanding and critical. Think about that from the context. If you're a parent, if your parent was like this, if your spouse was like this, that would be a very uncomfortable, but would be a very awkward role to be in. Or if this was your boss, where they were very demanding and critical of everyone because they have such high standards for themselves. So let's take this into a slightly different realm. It's always interesting to see how people's personality types affect different things. So we talked about how our culture affects how we see money and how we communicate around this. So this is how our personality types affect how we see and interact with money and finances. So there are 7 money personality types. And there's so many different finance games and quizzes that you can take. Literally just look up money personality types, and there's activities that you can take, and it would be a great learning tool for yourself, for your siblings, and for a potential partner as well. So let's go through these. Starting from the lower right, the worrier is someone who's constantly worried about losing money. So this is almost like the scarcity mindset. They lack confidence in their ability to achieve financial freedom, even if they actually have money. So that's what I really want to emphasize. This is that this is the kind of person who's always prepping, even if they have the big job, they're making good money. They're compulsively worried about money because they feel like things are going to be taken away. What they have is not permanent, and they could lose it at the drop of a hat. So that's the worrier. The gambler shares combinations between the spenders and the money makers. So let's go up to there first. The compulsive spender is pretty self-explanatory. They make unnecessary purchases. They spend when in emotional distress or for immediate gratification. They want that little hit of serotonin, and so they buy things. Experiences buyers are more after big splurges. So again, you can see right there that the compulsive spender will buy something not because they really want it or need it, but it's usually masking some emotional thing that they're going through, and then they feel very guilty about what they've just bought. The compulsive moneymaker believes life is better when you earn more. Their top priority is growing wealth, making more money, and they crave recognition for their financial success. I think we've all interacted with people like this. This is the person who's always bragging about like what they have, how much money they have, how big their bonus check is, perhaps even how much is in their accounts. There's someone who's constantly thumping their chest about how much money they have. So the gambler is kind of a combination between the previous two. They take big risks with money, And they're happy with financial wins, but they get deeply depressed over their losses. And again, the gambler really is probably kind of is chasing that high of like the risk. That's really perhaps more what they're interested in. The personality type can be indifferent to money. Usually it's because they were already financially well off. They rarely think about money, and they feel money should not influence important decisions in life. You should just make a decision based on the facts. But usually people who feel that way is because they grew up with it. The compulsive saver is someone who saves money endlessly, and they view money as a source of security. I really want to emphasize that. The compulsive saver is someone who sees money as protection, as something that will keep them safe. They're frugal and responsible with their money. They're a bargain shopping expert, even if they have money. And they have a fear of rational spending. So the compulsive saver, interestingly enough, often winds up becoming friends with, partners with the compulsive spender. And depending on how things go, that may be a good match. Opposites attract, right? But again, you can see there is plenty of minefields for issues to develop right there. And there's the saver splurger, and they share a combination between savers and spenders. They can be smart with their money for a certain amount of time, but then they'll crank and they'll give into spending impulses out of nowhere. And they're buying new cars or like 100 new shoes. So this is a fun activity. Feel free to comment, make a comment in the comments if you can kind of recognize perhaps what type you are. And again, these are not hard and fast. Everyone has kind of different aspects of each other, have different aspects of these personalities in themselves. But we all usually have kind of like a dominant type, right? So think about that. Be aware of what your relationship to money and finances is, and take that knowledge forward into your family, into interaction with your siblings, especially as you guys get older and you have to start planning for the future of the family, or when you're starting to discuss money matters with a potential partner or the partner that you have right now. It really is important for you all to understand what is your money personality. Now, to lighten things up a little bit right here, this is a little tricky to see, is these are lesser known personality types. And again, this is more for laughs more than anything else. But a couple examples are the personality type of, they use mason jars as decor. The person always has gum. They're the weirdos who put milk first in the cereal bowl and then they put the cereal on top. A person who makes lists. We all know people who have kind of personality quirks, right? And we need to, as Muslims, to try and, as much as we can, embrace and welcome and be accommodating to people and their personality quirks, as long as they're not detrimental to themselves or to us. So now, by popular request, I had there was a request for more information about birth order. So I found some interesting stuff with relation to personality types, and I figured this would be of interest to this audience. So with regards to the psychology of birth order, the birth order can have a significant impact or effect on the personality development of the child. And again, as always, we're speaking in broad generalities here. But these broad generalities are helpful for us to kind of think through some things in our own lives and our own families, and help us to think about what we might want to do different going forward. Generally speaking, firstborns are more likely to take charge, perhaps because they were given responsibility at an early age. Middle children are less likely to be frustrated or demanding of life. They're kind of more go with the flow. Lastborns are more likely to be tenacious or manipulative. Make of that what you will. Parents subconsciously identify with a child who occupies the spot in their family that they once did. I found this very, very interesting. Think about this. I'm going to read this again. Parents, or the adults who take care of you, subconsciously identify with the child who occupies the spot in their family that they once did. So if your father was a little brother, he may really connect with the little brother. If your mother was a middle child or a firstborn older sister, she may identify with the child that's in that particular role in their family. And there can be connection. There can be conflict in that connection as well, right? that they may kind of try to drive them as hard or be as lax with the child as they were. So again, we often replicate the things that we saw in our own homes growing up, for good or ill. And so that's definitely something to be aware of. On the lower right hand side, a lot of astronauts apparently were firstborns. Again, make of that what you will. And I found this interesting as well, that middle children tend to leave the house earlier than their siblings, perhaps because they're more chill, like, you know, they don't feel babied, but they also perhaps don't feel stifled. Like the middle the firstborns, maybe they have less responsibility. Perhaps they're more inclined to leave the nest and try different things. So now let's get into personality types with these. The image quality is not the best, so I will read this to you. Firstborns generally are responsible, motivated, controlling, cautious. They may be perfectionists, and they can be bossy. Firstborns out there in the audience, let me know if this is true. Or for those of you who had perhaps a very overbearing firstborn, what do you think of that? Middleborns, they often feel left out. They may take the peacemaker role in the family. I know as a middleborn, as the second child of three, so I'm the middle child in my family, I definitely did take on the role of the peacemaker. I probably am more of a people pleaser. And I served as a go-between when there was conflict in my family. Again, for good or ill. Sometimes that was not a good place to be in. Lastborns tend to be uncomplicated and or manipulative. I found that those two things didn't seem very compatible. They often seek attention, may be seen as self-centered and or fun. They might be the charming and outgoing one of the group. Now, again, we're talking about here just a family of three. And again, as we talked about earlier on in our sessions, we need to layer other things. Perhaps you're the firstborn son, but in your birth order, you were the fourth of like 8. Right? And there was a bunch of girls before you. There's 3 girls before you, but you're the firstborn son. Or you're the middle child, but you were a girl. You know, things of that nature. And then how's your culture handle that? How's your family handle that? These are all things to kind of layer over that. Again, as always, we're speaking in generalities. And the only child, they seek approval. They tend to come out more confident. They're mature for their age. And they may be a perfectionist. I found something else I found interesting. This is from a personal story. A friend of mine, his name is Adam. He was the miracle baby. He was the only child. His parents had him very late in life after thinking they would not be able to have kids for a long time. So his parents were quite a bit older. Was he spoiled and babied? Yes, he was. But I visited him. So we were grown adults at this time. I was already married. He was engaged. He had moved away. He had this career job, like he had a big boy job, bought a house. So I'm visiting him as we've been friends since middle school. Drove 3 hours to go see him, sit in his house. And his fiance has not moved in with him yet. So he's living on his own, like kind of like, I think really for the first time in his life. Because, he was the only child and lived with his parents for a long time. But his mother had made him his favorite dish, which is this spaghetti that she made and he loved. And so I'm there and driven 3.5 hours to come see him. And he got a care package from his mom when he visited the last time, when they visited him, which was some of his mom's famous spaghetti. And he's eating in front of me. And, he's not a Muslim, but Islamically, we would know that's very rude to not share with a guest. And I'm standing there. I'm not going to ask him. And then he looked at me. He's like, you want some of this spaghetti, don't you? And he's kind of giving me a hard time. But of course, he served me. But I'm like, Adam, real talk. Did it annoy you that you had to share with me? He's like, yes. Yes, it did annoy me. Couple things to unpack here. Only children never really learn how to share. They never had to. My friend was always the only child. He never had to share anything. If you're the firstborn, especially if you're a firstborn daughter, I think I gave this example earlier before. When you're at work or you're in a group setting, if there's someone who's always making sure, okay, is everyone safe? Checking up on everyone. Does everyone have a napkin? Like, I brought extra snacks for everyone. They probably were the firstborn child. 9 times out of 10, they probably were. The middle-born people are always trying to kind of like, kind of work an angle, be a people pleaser. The only child, they're kind of self-centered because that's the way that they've been raised. Not knocking any only childs out there. I'm just saying that's what the research tends to show, and that's my personal experience. My friend grudgingly shared his spaghetti with me. Some things to remember about birth order and pretty much everything else that we've covered in these 4 weeks. There are exceptions in every trait. I strongly encourage for you to focus on the positive trait of each birth order and each personality type. You are the way that you are. Allah made us the way that we are, for good or ill, right? As you've heard me say a number of times. If you're someone who flies off the handle and gets very angry, that's just the way that's the way Allah made you. Now, is that something you should work on and perhaps try to not be so angry? Yes. But but also people who tend to be like that are often very fierce, loyal friends. And that's a good thing, right? Become aware of your uniqueness. What are the things about you that you make you uniquely you, for good or ill, right? Use the information to understand yourself, your siblings, and others. Think about your mother or your father, or the people who raised you. What was their life experience? So let me give a personal story here. My father was a middle child. He grew up on a farm, as I think I mentioned before, in Mexico. Big family. I think he had like 8 or 9 siblings. Story that he's told me a number of times was that his, I think, slightly younger, a brother that was younger than him, but looked like a clone of his father, like the spitting image of his father, was favored above all other children. And my father remembers, after a hard day working in the fields on the farm, like in the mountains of Mexico, my grandfather would turn to that son. His name was Servedio. When they were, everyone was tromping along. They were tired, carrying their tools. They're walking along next to the wagon. My grandfather would always turn to Servedio, the one that looked so much like him. So you come up here, come ride with me. He would sit down next to him, and they would chat. And all the other sons were always made to feel like, well, this is not for you. You don't look like me. You're not like me. This one, not my oldest son, not my youngest son. This one, the one that looked like me. He was favored above all other sons. It's usually not that blatant in our families, but it might be. And that's definitely something you have to understand about your parents, about the places they come from, the parenting that they experienced, right? Again, I had heard the story many times about my father, but I didn't realize this, is that when he was born, I think it was tough times in the village. I think the crops were failing, something like that. Again, ask your immigrant parents or grandparents. There's always a story of there was a flood or there was a disease racking the village. It was actually a really horrifying, traumatic thing, but like they don't ever present it that way. All my life, my father had told me how he'd been fostered by, I think, his aunt or uncle. They were unable to have children, and since my grandparents, my great grandparents had a lot of children, and the crops were failing, my father was raised for the first 5 or 6 years of his life by people who were not his parents. They were family, and he just assumed they were his parents, but they were not. And when he got older and things had changed, my grandfather needed more manual labor that he didn't have to pay for on the farm, and he came to collect my father. And he said, Miguel, that's my father's name. Miguel, I'm your father. You're going to come with me now. And my father, who had been raised as a pampered, like a little brat, was rude to my grandfather. He's like, you're not my father. I'm not going to come with you. And the first time he met my grandfather was that interaction, and he got beat for being rude to my grandfather. That was his first memory of meeting his biological father. Think of how that trauma, even though my father presented it as like a haha, like what a wacky story. Yeah, no, those things affect you, right? Use this information, not just from this week, but from all other ones, to understand what were the life experiences of the people who raised you. What was the culture that surrounded them, the religion that they experienced, the traumas, the happiness, the sadness that they experienced. One of the last points I really want to make is don't use these traits as labels or stereotypes. Okay, it's very easy to do that. I strongly encourage you to take deeper dives in these things. These are not set in stone. These are not definitive. This should just give you a broad overview of the different personality types that you may have, that you may experience in your siblings, in your workplace. People are different. And the more open-minded we are, the more helpful this will be to us. So as we break for questioning, I want to thank you all so much for attending today and any of the other sessions that you saw. Again, you can catch up with me on Stephen Hernandez's Nonprofit Fundamentals on YouTube. If you would love to take these tests, literally just throw it in your Google machine. Myers-Briggs personality test, primary colors personality test, financial fitness or financial personality types, anything you can think of. Take the quizzes, take the deep psychological exams. They're all kinds of interesting, and you'll always learn something about yourself. So, inshallah, that is it for my formal presentation today. I hope this was of use as the other ones were. If you have any comments or questions, I would be happy to take them now. For those listening, just out of curiosity, I think we had done this before, but if you have, let me know how many siblings you all have, because I'm always curious about that and how that played out in your life. So, comment line is open. If you have any questions, if there's any if there's any questions from the organizers, I'd be happy to hear them as well. And that concludes my formal presentation for the moment. Think about the people who raised you. Think about the life experiences that they had. It's always a good question to ask them. Like, what was it like for you growing up as a kid? Like, did you have brothers or sisters? Like, what was your interaction with them like? I remember I worked with clients where they might be old now, like they're old people now, but I remember this woman I worked with once. She came to one of my singles workshops. She was probably in her 60s or 70s, and she just talked about how she had been a mama's girl, a daddy's girl. She was always having conflict with her mother. She had been engaged multiple times. She had multiple whirlwind romances, had stolen husbands, etc., etc. Was estranged from all of her siblings because her siblings were always jealous of the attention that she got from their father. On. And she was an older woman now, but she said that when she was in her 60s, when she found herself alone, she recognized that for decades she just assumed that everyone else was a jerk. But the one defining element in all these stories, all these negative interactions, all these failed relationships, estrangements between friends and family, it was her. She was the defining characteristic. And she realized that she had been raised as a spoiled brat, and she took that forward as she grew into adulthood. And so in her late 60s, she really had the realization, wow, I need to change my life. Like, I was raised in a way that meant I was rewarded from my attention seeking. I was rewarded from my manipulative behavior. And that caused her a lot of pain, and a lot of pain for the other people around her. Again, personality types are fed on and reflected by the people around us. They're not definitive, but boy, they can have a big impact on our life and those of those around us. So I hope everyone had a great time. I'm not seeing any questions right now, so we can close the session if we're open to doing that. Thank you again so much for attending. This was a wonderful opportunity, and I really appreciate it so much. Thank you.